I want to make sure my levels are right. Can you just tell me your name and your title, please?
Jennifer Rubiello, field organizer with Environment Florida.
All right, what is Environment Florida?
Environment Florida is a statewide, citizen-supported environmental advocacy group, and we work to make our environment cleaner, greener, and healthier.
Florida's water issues go back, the controversy goes back a long way. Why don't you set this up by telling our listeners what the issue was, what's the Clean Water Act, and what was the problem with certain waterways being under questionable jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act?
Sure. So the Clean Water Act, to take a step back, when we look back at the 1970s and 30, 40 years ago, our rivers all across the country used to light on fire. And so Congress, because of a lot of problems like this, decided to pass legislation, what we know as the Clean Water Act, to make sure that all of our streams, tributaries, wetlands, and rivers would have foundational protections from pollution. Now, this bedrock environmental law was called into question because of a couple polluter-led Supreme Court cases that arose in the last 10 years that put into question whether or not smaller streams and wetlands that flow into larger waterways, like the Hillsborough River, for example, deserve the same protections from pollution. And so now, because of these two cases, nearly 15,000 miles of streams in Florida aren't fully protected from development or pollution. And that also applies to 20 million acres of wetlands nationwide.
And this controversy went back and forth. The state tried to figure out a way to clarify this dichotomy here, this misunderstanding, and then finally the EPA came up with a rule that the federal government thought would clarify this. What happened there?
Exactly. So because a number of citizens, different environmental groups, sportsmen's groups, and a wide array of constituencies asked the EPA to clarify the Clean Water Act, the EPA last March proposed a rule that would restore Clean Water Act protections to 15,000 miles of streams in Florida and nearly half of our streams all across the country. Now, we just wrapped up earlier in November an 8-month public comment period where over 31 Floridians made comments in support of the rule. 5,000 of those were from right here in Tampa Bay.
31,000 Floridians?
Mm-hmm. And 800,000 Americans total across the country.
And some Republicans, especially in Congress, thought that this might be a federal takeover of water rights. I've heard this in the state legislature and also in the U.S. House of Representatives, where the federal government's coming and telling the states what to do. And the House passed kind of what they considered a fix for this. What was that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, every polluting industry under the sun, from big ag to oil and gas companies to the sugar industry, have been fighting this tooth and nail, calling it a regulatory overreach. But the reality is that this rule would just restore clean water protection, strengthen the Clean Water Act to what it was written to be. And so we saw this fall the House pass a bill that would block the EPA from moving forward with these really vital protections that will protect the waterways that we love to paddle in and swim in, and that we go bird watching to. And so we also saw the Senate also move to block these protections. Unfortunately, they weren't quite able to get there, and that's in part because of champions like Senator Nelson who have come out in support and voted twice already to make sure that the EPA is able to move forward with this. Unfortunately, our own local representative, U.S. Representative David Jolly, and also U.S. Senator Marco Rubio are amongst two of our Florida delegation that have been fighting this rule.
Could this come up for a vote again in January or later once the Senate has turned to Republican majority?
Sure, and we expect it to in many ways, but we also hope that the Senate which is where the fight is going to be, we'll see the overwhelming support from Floridians and Americans across the country, and a whole range of groups who support this, from here in Florida, the Everglades Coalition, sportsmen's groups, small business owners who we stood with earlier this week at a press conference, and city officials, who many of whom do understand that these protections are vital.
Why are they vital? Why is it important to have these protections on those small waterways and wetlands?
Absolutely. Well, the small tributaries and streams that maybe don't flow the whole year, but are definitely there, flow into larger bodies of water like Tampa Bay or the Hillsborough River, the Everglades. And here in Tampa, for example, the Hillsborough River provides a large chunk of our drinking water. Across the state, nearly 2 million Floridians get their drinking water from these smaller streams and tributaries. And so it's really important that they're protected just as much as the larger rivers.
If people are interested in this issue, what can they do?
Sure. Well, I would certainly encourage every single person to call their U.S. senator and U.S. representatives and tell them that you strongly support the EPA moving forward with these protections.
Those are my only questions. Is there anything I left out?
Nope. I think you covered it all.
All right. Thanks so much for your time today.
Great.